who's got a few of his own realities to deal with inside his own party at the moment, doesn't he, let alone the country. But he was speaking at a government SME Connect conference, small, medium-sized enterprises conference in Warwickshire this morning. Here's a taste of what he had to say.
COVID, war in Ukraine, inflation, all caused major disruption, drove up the cost of doing business. I know things are still tough, but our plan is starting to work.
Right, so things are getting better. Starting to get better is essentially the message there. But have they for you in any discernible way? And if they have, please share that, because Lord knows we need some brightness as well as some of the darkness that we're dealing with at the moment. I'm joined by Professor Sir John Curtice, polling expert and Professor of Politics at the University of Strathclyde. Good afternoon to you.
Good afternoon, Sheila.
Now, you deal in, not only, of course, but you deal in a couple of things I mentioned earlier on, statistics and polls and numerical realities. So what evidence is there for that glimmer of an attempt at confidence that Rishi Sunak or optimism, I should say, that Rishi Sunak's just presented to us?
Well, he's perfectly reasonable to argue that indeed over the last half year or so, real incomes have begun to rise. But the problem is that the backdrop to that is that this is a parliament which has seen the lowest drop in living standards for most of its time. And if you look at the national wealth and divide it by the number of people who are living here, we're still slightly poorer than we were back at the time of the 2019 general election. So as the Prime Minister, in a sense, was acknowledging, there's an awful lot of ground to make up before it's necessarily going to be the case that people are saying, oh, actually, you know what? Things really are better. So but of course, you know, he does at least have something to argue with. He clearly does have to try to persuade the public that the economy is doing better and that it would do better in future under his stewardship. After all, the economy is undoubtedly one of the central issues for the public. It is most of the time, and certainly if you try to look at, you know, who are the people who are most likely to have given up on the Conservatives, having voted for them in 2019, it is people who are pessimistic about the economy. However, problem is that so far at least, the polling evidence is that the public don't feel markedly more optimistic than they did 6 months ago, when perhaps living standards were beginning to improve. Even amongst those who voted Conservative in 2019, there are as many people who think the economy is getting worse than think it's getting better. And the second problem the government has, and this is perhaps the most difficult one, is that whatever improvement there is in the economy now, and whatever improvement there might be by the autumn when we're now expecting the election, is can the Conservatives claim credit for it in the eyes of the public? And here the fundamental problem they face is that once we start talking about the economy, pretty much all the opposition have to do in order to start to sow doubts in voters' minds about whether or not they should be trusting the Conservatives on the economy is to say the words Liz Truss. In other words,
I was about to.
Yeah, voters still remember the so-called fiscal event that did severe damage to the Conservatives' reputation for managing the economy. And of course, one of the apparent consequences of that, which is the rise in interest rates, some of that is still working through as more and more people are having to renegotiate their mortgages and discovering they're having to pay an awful lot more. So even if they're going to pay less in the way of taxation, and the government has something been arguing about, at least those people on average incomes having the lowest rate of taxation for a very long time. There's an argument there, but the trouble is their outgoings in terms of housing are going up for many of them, and that therefore causes problems. The other issue, by the way, not much talked about, is that those people who are trying to pay off their student loan, they're not have been found their burden in any way reduced. And once you add a student loan to the cost of national insurance and the cost of income tax and the fact that tax thresholds are not going up in line with inflation, many people are still in effect paying an awful lot directly after their wage packet.
I mean, I'm so glad you mentioned Liz Truss and the impact of some of her choices, because I read today that mortgage offers are being removed within days now. You've really got to make your mind up quickly and work out whether you can afford it or arrange to afford it incredibly quickly. He left it off the list, didn't he? The clip we played began with COVID, the war in Ukraine, inflation, but no mention of that. I mean, is that the big? Yeah, as you've explained why. But is that the
why would
he?
he?
Yeah.
Of course he's not. He's not going to do the opposition's work for them. He's 19 points behind in the opinion polls. And the fundamental problem the Conservatives have is that they fell to 25% on average in the opinion polls in the immediate wake of Liz Truss's debacle. And at the moment, on average in the opinion polls since the budget, they're actually slightly lower at 24 points. And so far, they have not managed to achieve any significant long-term recovery from an event that basically cost the Conservatives around 6 points in the opinion polls in 6 weeks. And everything you need to understand about the Conservatives' predicament is summed up by two signal events. One is Liz Truss. The other, by the way, is Boris Johnson and Partygate. When that story first came out, it cost the Conservatives 6 points in 6 weeks. And that's the other thing from which they have recovered. I mean, however, some people at least still want to talk about Boris Johnson, but the honest truth is the evidence there from the polling is that Mr. Johnson, he was a remarkably successful campaigner as Mayor of London. He was a remarkably successful campaigner in the 2019 general election. However, unfortunately for him, the word that voters are most likely now to say is when they're asked about him is the word liar, and therefore his credibility as a campaigner is now severely damaged as compared with 4.5 years ago.
And you talked at the very beginning there about people who feel better off. I mean, you can look at your own bank account and know whether you are better off or not, but also how people feel is a really important part of this, isn't it? It's true of any aspect of life, really. It's absolutely in the mix, isn't it, in most situations? When you do polling, of course, that's partly what you're testing, isn't it?
Yeah, sure. At the end of the day, it isn't the objective economy that matters. It's the subjective economy. It's how people feel about it. And as I was saying, who do they credit and who do they blame? And at the moment, at least, for reasons that are understandable, these as the Prime Minister was talking about, this has been a parliament during which we have been more deeply and consistently pessimistic about the economy than we have been in any parliament since Ipsos, who've been regularly collecting this data ever since the late 1970s. It is a lot. We need to be dragged back from a deep mood of pessimism. The mood of pessimism, frankly, isn't confined to the economy. Voters have their doubts about whether or not Labour, if they are put into office, will be able to turn things around. But at the moment, at least, the voter mood seems to be, well, we feel that this lot has made such a mess of it that at least if we try the opposition, there is a chance that maybe they'll do better, although voters remain to be convinced. In a sense, insofar as there is perhaps still a chink of light for the Conservatives, it isn't so much the fact that the economy is turning around, etc., etc. It is at the end of the day, it's not clear that the opposition have entirely sealed the deal with the electorate.
Yeah, but despair is currently working for Labour, it would seem.
Yes, absolutely. I mean, what Keir Starmer has managed to achieve is he's managed to persuade people that the Labour Party is a reasonably moderate party. He's turned that around from Jeremy Corbyn. It's not, his own popularity is, the high levels of net dissatisfaction in many polls. He's not even as popular as David Cameron was before the 2010 election. Ask people whether Labour are ready for government. Well, the numbers are not too bad, but they're not as good as they were before 1997. Okay. And again, people are more likely to trust Labour on the economy than on the Conservatives. But the most popular answer often is either none or don't know.